Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Brittany's heels clicked against the pavement. Each step felt like a performance, a balancing act between the unfamiliar weight distribution of her new body and the expectant gazes of passers-by. The fashion district buzzed with energy, models and designers flitting between ateliers like bees in a garden of couture. Brittany's hand trembled as she reached for the ornate brass door handle of Maison de la Mode, the prestigious fashion house where she'd be working for the next year. The scholarship committee had arranged this placement, insisting it would provide invaluable experience for her future law career. How fashion related to law, Brittany couldn't fathom, but she was in no position to argue. The cool air inside the building washed over her, carrying the scent of leather and perfume. A statuesque receptionist with razor-sharp cheekbones glanced up, her gaze sweeping over Brittany with the practiced assessment of someone who cataloged a person's worth by their appearance. "Can I help you?" The words dripped from perfectly painted lips, tinged with a hint of boredom. Brittany swallowed hard, her newly feminine voice still feeling foreign in her throat. "I'm here to see Madame Beaumont. I'm the new intern." The receptionist's eyebrow arched slightly. "Ah, yes, the American. Follow me." Brittany trailed behind, acutely aware of the sway of her hips, the brush of fabric against her thighs. Every movement felt like a conscious effort, a reminder of the drastic change she'd undergone. The hallways were lined with photographs of impossibly beautiful women draped in exquisite gowns. Brittany couldn't help but feel like an imposter among these icons of femininity. They stopped before a set of double doors, sleek and modern against the building's classical architecture. The receptionist rapped her knuckles against the wood, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. "Madame, your new intern has arrived." Madame Beaumont sat behind a glass desk, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She looked up from a spread of fabric swatches, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Brittany with laser-like intensity. Come in," she said, her French accent thick but her English impeccable. "Let me look at you." Brittany stepped forward, fighting the urge to hunch her shoulders or cross her arms over her chest. Madame Beaumont circled her slowly, humming to herself. Yes, I can work with this. Turn, please." Brittany complied, her cheeks burning as she rotated like a mannequin on display. "Good bone structure, decent posture, though we'll need to work on that. You've never modeled before, have you, Cherie?" The question caught Brittany off guard. "Modeled? No, I'm here as an intern, for the business side of things." Madame Beaumont waved her hand dismissively. "Business, fashion, it's all the same in this world. To understand the business, you must understand the product. And in fashion, you are always the product." She clapped her hands twice, and as if summoned by magic, 2 assistants appeared at the door. "Take her to wardrobe. I want her ready for the afternoon shoot." Before Brittany could protest, she was whisked away down another corridor. The assistants chattered in rapid-fire French, occasionally switching to English to give her instructions. "Arms up. Step into this. Hold still." Brittany found herself prodded and redressed in a whirlwind of activity. Makeup was applied with scientific precision, her hair teased and curled into a style she'd never have attempted on her own. When they finally allowed her to look in a mirror, Brittany gasped. The person staring back at her was a stranger, a stunningly beautiful stranger with smoky eyes and lips the color of ripe cherries, the dress shimmering like liquid silver. "Magnifique," one of the assistants declared. "Madame will be pleased." Brittany was led to a vast room that had been transformed into a Parisian cafe scene. Lights blazed, cameras clicked, and in the center of it all stood a man who could only be the photographer. He was rail-thin with a shock of white hair, his black turtleneck a stark contrast to the colorful chaos around him. "Ah, there she is!" he exclaimed, beckoning Brittany forward. "Our fresh face! Come, let's see what you can do." Brittany's legs felt like jelly as she approached. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I'm not a model, I'm just an intern." The photographer laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender.
Cherie, in this business, everyone is a model. Now sit at the table there and pretend you're waiting for a lover who's running late.
Brittany perched on the delicate cafe chair, her mind reeling. This wasn't what she'd signed up for. She was supposed to be learning about fashion law, contracts, and intellectual property. Instead, she was playing dress-up in front of a camera.
No,
the photographer tisked. You look like you're waiting for a root canal. Relax your shoulders, tilt your chin down slightly. Think mysterious, alluring. Brittany tried to comply, but every pose felt awkward and forced. She could feel the crew's growing frustration, their whispers and sighs like pinpricks against her skin. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Madame Beaumont's voice cut through the tension. Enough. I've seen all I need to see. The room fell silent as she approached, her heels echoing on the hardwood floor. Brittany braced herself for a dressing down, certain she'd blown her one chance at this scholarship. To her surprise, Madame Beaumont's face softened into something almost resembling a smile. You're a diamond in the rough, my dear. Unpolished, but with potential. We'll make a model of you yet. Brittany's mouth went dry. But, Madame, I'm here to learn about the business side of fashion, the legal aspects. I want to be a lawyer, not a model. Madame Beaumont's laugh was like tinkling crystal. Oh, chérie, don't you see? This is the business of fashion. To negotiate contracts, to protect our designs, you must understand every aspect of our world. And that includes knowing what it feels like to be in front of the camera, to wear the clothes, to be the face of a brand. She placed a hand on Brittany's shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. Give it time. You may find you have talents you never knew existed. As Brittany was led back to the dressing room to change, her head spun with the implications of Madame Beaumont's words. She'd come to Paris expecting to sit in an office, poring over legal documents. Instead, she was being thrust into the spotlight, expected to embody a femininity she was still struggling to understand. Back in her own clothes, a conservative blouse and pencil skirt she'd chosen to project professionalism. Brittany made her way to the small apartment the scholarship committee had arranged for her. The streets of Paris seemed different now, as if the city itself had shifted while she was in the studio. She caught her reflection in a shop window and paused. The makeup was still there, a ghost of the transformation she'd undergone. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. Was this truly who she was now? Not just on the outside, but on the inside, too? The apartment was tiny but charming, with a small balcony overlooking a bustling street. Brittany dropped her bag and sank onto the bed, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She thought of her family back home, her supportive mother, her teasing brother Derek, her skeptical father. What would they think if they could see her now? A ping from her phone startled her out of her reverie. It was a message from Janet, the scholarship coordinator. Hope your first day went well. Remember, this experience is about more than just learning the law. It's about discovering who you are and what you're capable of. Embrace the journey. Brittany stared at the message, a knot forming in her stomach. She'd agreed to this scholarship, to this transformation, because it was her only path to becoming a lawyer. But now it seemed the path was twisting in directions she'd never anticipated. She stood and walked to the balcony, letting the evening air wash over her. The city of light sprawled before her, a tapestry of possibility and uncertainty. For better or worse, this was her life now. Brittany Spears, intern, model in training, and aspiring lawyer. As the sun dipped below the Parisian skyline, Brittany made a silent promise to herself. She would see this through, no matter how challenging or unexpected the journey might be. After all, she'd already undergone the most drastic transformation imaginable. What was a little modeling compared to that? The next morning dawned bright and early, the sounds of the city filtering through Brittany's open window. She groaned and rolled over, her body still adjusting to the time difference and the lingering effects of her transformation. For a moment, as consciousness slowly returned, she forgot where she was and who she had become. Reality crashed back as she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror opposite her bed. Long blonde hair spilled across the pillow, framing a face that was undeniably feminine, yet still held echoes of the young man she'd been just weeks ago. Brittany dragged herself out of bed, determined to face the day head-on. She had a job to do, a scholarship to earn, and a future to secure. The fact that it all hinged on her ability to adapt to this new identity was a hurdle she'd just have to overcome. She rifled through her closet, filled with clothes she'd hastily purchased before leaving for Paris. Everything felt like a costume, an ill-fitting skin she was trying to inhabit. Finally, she settled on a simple black dress and low heels, professional enough for the office, feminine enough to satisfy Madame Beaumont's expectations. As she applied her makeup, a skill she was still far from mastering, Brittany's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Derek, her younger brother. "Hey sis, how's life as a fashionista? Don't forget us little people when you're hanging out with supermodels?" Brittany's heart clenched. Derek's prank might have set this whole situation in motion, but he'd been surprisingly supportive once the reality of the situation had sunk in. Still, his casual use of sis stung in ways she wasn't prepared for. She typed out a quick reply, trying to keep things light. "Still learning the ropes. No supermodels yet, unless you count the one in the mirror." The winking emoji felt forced, but Brittany hit send anyway. She couldn't bring herself to share the full reality of her situation. The modeling, the identity crisis, the overwhelming sense of being in over her head. The walk to Maison de la Mode was becoming familiar, the streets of Paris slowly revealing their secrets to her. She passed cafes where artists and writers had once gathered, boutiques displaying clothes that cost more than her entire wardrobe back home, and patisseries that filled the air with the scent of butter and sugar. As she approached the fashion house, Brittany squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. Today would be different. Today, she would assert herself, make it clear that she was here to learn about fashion law, not to be a living mannequin. Her resolve lasted approximately 30 seconds after walking through the door. "Ah, Brittany, there you are!" Madame Beaumont's assistant, a whip-thin man named Claude, materialized at her side. "We need you in hair and makeup immediately. The shoot for the fall campaign starts in an hour." Brittany opened her mouth to protest, but Claude was already steering her towards the elevators.
"But I thought—" "No time for thinking, Cherie. We have a schedule to keep."
Before she knew it, Brittany found herself once again stripped, primped, and polished into a vision of haute couture. This time, they'd dressed her in a magnificent coat that seemed to be made entirely of autumn leaves, each one intricately embroidered and beaded. As she was ushered onto the set, a faux Parisian park complete with wrought iron benches and strategically placed piles of leaves, Brittany caught sight of herself in a full-length mirror. The person staring back at her was breathtaking, a creature of flame and gold that seemed to embody the very essence of fall. For a moment, just a fleeting second, Brittany felt a thrill of excitement. Is this what models felt like all the time? This sense of transformation, of becoming living art? The photographer, a different one from yesterday, began barking orders in rapid-fire French. Brittany did her best to comply, twirling in the coat, tossing armfuls of leaves into the air, leaning against a prop lamppost with what she hoped was a sultry expression. As the morning wore on, Brittany found herself relaxing into the role. It was still strange, still far from what she'd expected to be doing, but there was a certain freedom in pretending to be someone else. Here, in front of the camera, she didn't have to be Brett pretending to be Brittany. She could be anyone, anything. During a break in the shooting, as assistants fussed with her hair and touched up her makeup, Brittany overheard a heated conversation between Madame Beaumont and a man she didn't recognize. "The contract is ironclad, Jean-Luc," Madame Beaumont was saying, her voice low but intense. "You cannot simply walk away because a better offer came along." The man, Jean-Luc apparently, scoffed. "Contracts are made to be broken, Simone.
You know as well as I do that in this industry, loyalty lasts only as long as the next collection." Brittany's ears perked up.
This was it. This was the kind of situation she'd come here to learn about. The intricacies of fashion law, the dance between creativity and commerce. Without thinking, she turned towards the conversation. "Excuse me, Madame Beaumont? I couldn't help but overhear." Both Madame Beaumont and Jean-Luc turned to look at her, surprise evident on their faces. Brittany swallowed hard, but pressed on. "If the contract is as solid as you say, then Mr. Jean-Luc would be in breach if he were to break it. Depending on the specific clauses, that could open him up to significant financial penalties, not to mention damage to his professional reputation." A heavy silence fell over the set. Brittany could feel every eye on her, could practically hear the collective intake of breath. She'd overstepped, she realized. She wasn't here to give legal advice. She was here to look pretty and do as she was told. To her surprise, Madame Beaumont's face slowly spread into a wide smile. "Well, well. It seems our little model has hidden depths. Tell me, Brittany, what else do you know about contract law?" For the next 15 minutes, as the crew looked on in bewilderment, Brittany found herself engaged in a spirited discussion about the finer points of fashion law. She drew on everything she'd learned in her pre-law classes, every late night spent poring over legal textbooks, every debate she'd had with her classmates. Jean-Luc listened with growing dismay as Brittany outlined exactly why his plan to jump ship to a competing fashion house was legally dubious at best. By the end of the impromptu lesson, he was nodding grudgingly. "Perhaps," he said, "I have been hasty in my decisions. We should discuss the terms of my contract further, Simone." As Jean-Luc walked away, Madame Beaumont turned to Brittany with a newfound respect in her eyes. "I begin to see why the scholarship committee was so insistent on your placement here, my dear. You are full of surprises." Brittany felt a flush of pride, quickly followed by a wave of confusion. This was what she'd wanted, a chance to prove her legal knowledge, to show that she was more than just a pretty face. But it had all happened while she was dressed like an autumn fairy, her face painted and her hair styled within an inch of its life. "Now," Madame Beaumont said, clapping her hands, "back to work. We have a campaign to finish." As Brittany resumed her poses, tossing leaves and smiling mysteriously at the camera, her mind was elsewhere. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to reconcile these two worlds, the glamour of high fashion and the intellectual rigor of the law. The rest of the day passed in a blur of costume changes, photo shoots, and stolen moments of legal discussion. Brittany found herself being introduced to designers, models, and executives, each conversation an opportunity to showcase both her newfound modeling skills and her legal acumen. By the time she stumbled back to her apartment that evening, Brittany was exhausted but exhilarated. She kicked off her heels. How did women wear these things all day? And collapsed onto her bed. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her mother. "How are you settling in, sweetheart? Your father and I miss you. Are you happy?" Brittany stared at the message for a long moment. Was she happy? It was a more complicated question than it should have been. She was living in Paris, working for one of the most prestigious fashion houses in the world. She was on a path to achieving her dream of becoming a lawyer, even if that path looked nothing like what she'd expected. But she was also living a life that felt, in many ways, like an elaborate masquerade. Every morning, she woke up in a body that still felt foreign, put on clothes that sometimes felt like a costume, and stepped into a world she was only beginning to understand. Yet today, for the first time, she'd felt a spark of something, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could make this work, that she could find a way to be true to herself, to her ambitions, while navigating this new identity. Brittany typed out a reply to her mother, choosing her words carefully. "It's challenging, but in a good way. I'm learning so much about fashion, about law, about myself. I think I might be on the right path, even if it's not the one I expected. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.